California high-speed rail is good, actually. Yes, I do think it had some large problems in the beginning, but I still think it's a great project. What has mainly held it back is the project not receiving enough money in the first place. I know that sounds confusing, especially with some of the problems that it has had, but I'll explain this later. I've wanted to make a California high-speed rail video for a while, but I've been putting it off. RealLifeLore video finally sent me over the edge though. It's people like him that truly make this project have even more issues because of misunderstandings on what it's trying to accomplish. Anyway, let's dive into this and oh boy, I have to talk about California.
California dreaming, on such a winter's day.
Okay, let's talk about what California high-speed rail is trying to accomplish. The whole idea behind building a high-speed rail system came from the mid-90s when the state of California was reinvesting in its rail infrastructure. You see, the high-speed rail is important, but it was not the primary goal of the state at the time. In the 90s, California took pseudo-control over most of the intrastate Amtrak routes that existed, with the three big ones being the Capitol Corridor, the Pacific Surfliner, and the San Joaquins. All three of these trains then feed into city centers where commuter trains, regional trains, and local services all connect. For the most part, California has achieved a massive improvement since the 90s in their rail system, locally and within the metro regions. But there's one thing that has always been missing, and it's a core backbone between the north and south metro areas. And that's where California high-speed rail comes in. The high-speed rail route is going to be California's backbone in a future where we need to lessen our hydrocarbon use. But before I address anything, let's move on to correcting this terrible video. I hate the trash on store brand Wendover, I mean RealLifeLore too much, but this type of video where people outright shame California high-speed rail because it's had problems getting started is way overdone. Instead, let's talk about the issues that surround the project and the things that they're doing right. But I have to use RealLifeLore's video as an example because when you have 1 million followers, you can't just go, "Whoopsie, I made a mistake," while blatantly misrepresenting an entire region. But let's first cover what Joseph says about the chosen speed for the train in his video.
A lot of it was pretty unrealistic from the start, specifically relating to the system's speed requirements. It specified that the trains operating on the lines must have an operating speed of 220 miles per hour. There aren't any trains in the world that can economically operate continuously at a sustained speed of 220 miles per hour. For example, in China, some of their quickest trains once ran at 217 miles per hour, but were later reduced closer to 200 miles per hour due to the hugely increased costs of running them continuously at those faster speeds.
Alright, one, if you're gonna make broad statements about railroad and trains, generally try not to be wrong or completely wrong, because if there's one group of people that know way more than you, it's train people. And I know this because I get corrected all the time with little bits of knowledge that I had no idea about. Also, dude, if you actually looked up the Chinese train you're talking about, you'd know that back in 2017, they put it back up to 350 kilometers an hour, which is 220 miles an hour again. It's currently running at that speed. Here's an article that talks about it. Also, I don't really understand why you think this is impossible. Yeah, if this was the average speed of the train, this would definitely be impossible. But this is the track speed. Now, what is track speed? Track speed is basically the maximum allowed speed any vehicle can travel on that piece of track. The government goes in a little bit more depth to explain that there's actually classes of track that allow for different speeds to be authorized. But projects like California high-speed rail can actually get waivers to go even faster than the maximum class on here. 220 miles an hour is actually just the modern standard for building track speed for high-speed rail. Like you said, they build tracks like that in China all the time, and in Europe you can find 220 mile an hour tracks in a few places. So once we actually have to hand it to California for trying to shoot above and go for the actual golden thing, instead of just shooting for above mediocre or above status quo, unlike some other projects. But maybe that's the topic for another video. For the next part of Joseph's video, he starts talking about the route.
This included a decision to take a detour from the original plan towards the town of Palmdale, rather than routing the track more directly from Los Angeles to Bakersfield, a detour that cost an extra $5 billion. Makes the total journey 12 minutes slower, and all for a town of only 150,000 people. Likewise, further to the north near San Francisco, it was decided to serve San Jose on the new main line with completely new track, rather than utilizing the already built Bay Area Rapid Transit or BART system.
Man, I'm tired. Please give me a break. So, anyone from the Bay Area immediately knows what the problem is here. BART is a rapid transit system, and not only is it a third rail running system that has a weird gauge, has broad gauge, meaning it uses wide tracks, so that means that normal rolling stock would not fit on it. But let's give him the benefit of the doubt, because he's a normie, and we'll assume he meant Caltrain. Now, this is one of those things that most of the news agencies and most of the normie channels don't talk about much, but one of the best things that has happened with California high-speed rail is that it's modernizing a lot of systems that it connects with, like Caltrain. Caltrain recently received overhead electrification at 25 kilovolts, which is the modern standard pretty much around the world. It's nice to see an American commuter rail finally adopting real electrification and good rolling stock that is in line with the 21st century. But I don't know where he got this idea that they're building a whole new main line from San Jose to San Francisco for California high-speed rail, because they're just using the Caltrain main line. Yeah, they have upgraded some stuff along it, including that's one of the things like electrification, but they're not building a new main line, nor are they building new tracks adjacent to the Caltrain. They're just using Caltrain and updating the corridor. But again, to reiterate, this is one of the main projects that they wanted to accomplish in the 90s when they set out to do the high-speed rail. It was not only the high-speed rail, it was a regional rail system throughout California that they wanted to integrate into the entire system. So they are achieving their goals. With that out of the way, let's talk about the Burbank to Bakersfield area that he talked about earlier. So we have to ask ourselves, why did the engineers choose that circuitous route? And no, it's not just because they wanted to go to Palmdale. Before I tell you the obvious answer, and some of you have probably guessed it already, let's take a look at the European high-speed rail network. So if you see purple and red, that means those are your fastest lines, and if you see yellow and gray, that means those are your slowest lines. Alright, now let's do something interesting. Here's a European topographic map. That means it shows where the mountains are and stuff, whatever. Now let's lay that over the high-speed rail network in Europe. Notice anything? Well, you can clearly see there are two areas in Europe with big mountains, and they don't have any high-speed trains. This is because tunneling through mountains is a lot of money, and if you want the project to be slightly cheaper, you're going to avoid mountains. So if you look at a topographical map of California, you can see that, wow, they avoided the mountains. Wow, I could have never guessed that. So when people are like, oh, why did they choose the route that hits the inner cities in the center of California? Well, it's because going straight from San Francisco to Los Angeles would have been expensive as hell. All right, next Joseph talks about the part of it where it goes from Los Angeles to San Diego, aka the Surfliner corridor.
For instance, the team could have decided that rather than laying a brand new track between Los Angeles and San Diego, an already fairly popular route, the already existing Amtrak track there could have just been simply upgraded. This would have cut the total trip time by 60 minutes and provided an immediate impact to commuters along this route. However, the California High-Speed Rail Authority decided to instead build an entirely new route, adding an additional $7 billion to the total cost.
All right, first off, the route that he's showing for the Surfliner is very wrong. The Surfliner literally goes on the coast. That's why it has the name. And there's a massive problem because of this.
You won't be able to get to San Diego by train anytime soon. Amtrak and Metrolink have canceled all trains for now after unusually high ocean waves have damaged the track in San Clemente. A track near the Cypress Shores neighborhood is described as unstable. It runs along the ocean over some sand.
Because of safety concerns with this portion of the railway near San Clemente. Drone video shows high tides from last week that sent waves crashing onto the tracks. Officials are worried about the stability of the tracks and the cliff it sits on.
Yeah, so the Surfliner right-of-way literally sits between the ocean and a hard place, and unless you're going to destroy the highway there, you're not going to have enough room to actually make the sweeping curves for high-speed rail. Now, do I think that the Surfliner corridor should be upgraded? Hell yeah, of course. And I think that eventually the corridor and everything along it should be straightened and electrified, but you're not going to ever get high-speed rail out of that corridor. Don't joke with that. Okay, now let's talk about cost.
Nearly 14 years now since the passing of Prop 1A, the cost of the project has ballooned from $40 billion to nearly $100 billion due to delays, cost increases, and the slew of lawsuits thrown at the Rail Authority. Further, that $100 billion price tag is just for the San Francisco to Los Angeles segment of Phase 1.
So let's first off look at something that's very similar to the California project, which is actually the original Shinkansen route between Tokyo and Osaka. Just like the California high-speed rail project, the original Shinkansen was quoted at 200 billion yen, but it ended up doubling that to 400 billion yen. But the thing about that is that no one remembers that, and anyone that talks about the Shinkansen nowadays never even thinks about that at all. Like, they just think, oh, Japan has a great rail network. There's no like thought about, oh, back in the day, I can't believe this cost so much money. Well, the same thing with the California project, which is, yeah, there's cost overruns and there's stuff that sucks. But the thing is that once this is done, people will be like, oh man, California has a fantastic system. I can't remember when they didn't have this. But since we're on the topic of the actual cost of the project, why don't we talk about why the thing has cost so much, or why it's going to cost so much? But to do that, I need to reach for a book in my cabinet. 1 second. Yes, I think it's this one. Yeah, here we go. So today in Book Club, we will be discussing the book Contractors All the Way Down by the Armchair Urbanist. One of the main two reasons that American infrastructure is so expensive is that we outsource and outsource and outsource to contractors and different people, different aspects of the project just continuously. And when you do that, every person in between has to make profit of some sort. And that's how you get ballooning costs. I will discuss in a future episode how you can kind of avoid this and some political decisions you can do to avoid these cost overruns with infrastructure. The other issue of why a lot of American projects end up going over budget is because we're often building things that we haven't built in a while or don't continuously build. So there's often a loss of knowledge that has to be rebuilt as the project continues. And we saw that with California high-speed rail sort of in the beginning when they had like the formation stage of like how to do the thing. So literally you could say that some of the cost goes to the education of learning to do this again. Or just learning from someone else how to do this. Basically, you can just say that some of your project money is going toward infrastructure education for future generations, which is not a terrible thing. Also, like I mentioned earlier, I think one of the best decisions would be to fund California high-speed rail even more, like give it more money. Because one of the ways that you can actually save money in the long run is if you fund it in the first place and give it a lot of money at first, so you can actually finish the project faster or finish the thing in a shorter amount of time. This actually saves you money for two reasons. One is that you pay people for less time, like in general, because you're finishing the project faster, but also you have a almost like factory system where you can go through and finish this at a very fast pace versus just stopping it and then starting it again, stopping it and then starting it again, which wastes a lot of time and a lot of startup time. So there's one last thing that Joseph says that I want to go over.
The only problem in California is that the CHSR is expecting that 75% of its riders will come not from airline passengers, but from people who usually make the journey by car, which historically has just not been the main demographic of people who switch to using high-speed rail.
Yeah, but your demographic numbers are coming from Europe where they actually have good transportation in the first place. In the US, we are stuck with cars. We have to drive. So like if someone has the option to take a train instead of driving, yeah, they're definitely going to do that, especially because the I-5 corridor in California is like notorious for being terrible with traffic. Also, there's an estimated 21 million trips made via car between Los Angeles and San Francisco a year. And that sort of brings us into my next topic. If you don't have it already, there should be an extremely loud clock in the back of your head that's going tick-tock, like really loudly. And that's the climate change clock. This thing is relentless and it doesn't stop. And as we continue into the future, it just gets louder and louder. One thing that I really do applaud California is that they actually have a plan on how to go into a sustainable future, and they're already building the infrastructure for this. Now, some of their laws are very much a grift, like the plastic straw thing, whatever, but the California high-speed rail is a great physical, tangible project that is actually really meaningful in the large scale of things. Electric cars will not save us, and I have a whole video on that here, but building sustainable transportation and then building cities around that transportation is the way we're going to save ourselves. Now, California high-speed rail is just one piece of the puzzle. All the other pieces are coming together, hopefully. But another one is like Caltrain and the electrification that comes along with California high-speed rail. And there's no excuse for other states not to do something similar. The state that I'm currently living in, Pennsylvania, could easily electrify from Harrisburg to Pittsburgh, but they just don't. So again, I really think that California has to get more praise than it's getting, because yeah, it's had a lot of fundamental issues when California high-speed rail initially started, but they're on the right track and it's the right thing to do. And I think more people should harp on that because it's really undersold, especially channels like RealLifeLore and all of the other media outlets that just like to bash this thing with no like other praise of any sort. So to close this video out, yes, I think California high-speed rail is a good project. Yes, I think it should get more funding, but I think that there should be more consideration on how it integrates itself with more of the systems around California. Yes, I think there was problems in the beginning, but I think most of them have been ironed out at this point. I'd like to thank you for making it through this video, because that was a lot of energy about California. But thanks to all my Patreons for keeping these videos alive and going. And if you guys like merch, I have it now, so check it out below the video or whatever. But I hope to see you guys in the next one. Thanks.